Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Unbound. This is another off-script episode. I want to talk about a case that's 6 years old, almost 7 years old, I guess, but it remains unsolved. It's the story of Liz Barraza, a young woman killed in broad daylight in Tomball, Texas, and the mystery that surrounds her death. Before I get into this, I just want to be clear about something. I've spent time with the details on this one. I've read through reports, witness statements. I've gone through surveillance analysis, timeline reconstructions. I've gone through a lot of the publicly available records and some materials that aren't as easily accessible. So what I'm about to share isn't just media coverage or internet speculation. It comes from actual documentation. But it's all pretty much out there, and there are a lot of other podcasters talking about it. There need to be more, though. More people need to look. Netflix, do a documentary or something already. Even with all of that, this case is still maddeningly unsolved. So that's why I think, somebody needs to do something with it. This is the mystery of Liz Barraza. It was January 25th, 2019. It was a Friday morning, and Liz, at 29 years old, was outside of her home on Stillhouse Canyon Drive in Tomball, Texas, setting up for a garage sale. So her and her husband, Sergio, her husband, Sergio, had left for work around 6:45 that morning, and Liz was alone arranging items on tables in the driveway for a garage sale because her and her husband wanted to pay for a fifth anniversary trip that they took to Disney or were taking to Disney. I don't remember exactly. She was wearing a Harry Potter robe because she was a huge fan of the franchise, along with Star Wars. And she and Sergio were active in the 501st Legion, which is a cosplay community. It was supposed to be just a normal morning. She was just going to have a garage sale, make some extra cash. She took the day off work. Work knew she was taking the day off work. Just kind of getting rid of things they didn't need anymore, typical reason for a garage sale, right? A neighbor's camera captured what happened next. And I reviewed the footage frame by frame in the case files, and it's grainy, but it's weird. A dark colored pickup truck, possibly a Nissan Frontier, based on the body shape and tailgate configuration, pulled up to the curb just after 6:48 a.m. The timestamp, I think, is critical here. Sergio had been gone for only 3 minutes. 3. A disguised figure steps out. The person was wearing what appeared to be a long, dark wig, a hat, and clothing that made identifying even basic characteristics nearly impossible. Height estimates from the footage put them between 5'3" and 5'8", which is a massive range and doesn't really help narrow anything down. The person's build was unclear. The clothing was bulky, probably intentionally so. Gender unknown. Investigators couldn't definitively say male or female based on gait, posture, or any physical markers. This figure approached Liz. According to what investigators were able to piece together from the footage and witness accounts, she reportedly even said good morning to the shooter. Polite, unsuspecting, just greeting who she thought was an early customer at her garage sale. Apparently the good morning was captured on her doorbell camera, but just the audio. There was a brief exchange. It's impossible to hear what was said on the surveillance footage, but the body language suggests a moment of conversation. Maybe the shooter said something. Maybe they asked a question. Maybe they handed her something. There's speculation in the files about whether a piece of paper or note was involved, though that's never been confirmed. And then the shooter pulled a revolver out and fired multiple times. So let me be specific about this because the details matter. These shots were close range. It wasn't random spraying. This was deliberate. The shooter knew what they were doing. Liz collapsed. The shooter got back into the truck and drove away. But the chilling part that's documented clearly in the surveillance timing or the timeline, the truck circled back moments later, driving slowly past the scene again. You can see it on the footage. It passes by the house, slows down, and then continues. Was the shooter confirming Liz was down? checking to see if anyone had come outside or making sure the job was done. We don't know, but it wasn't the behavior of someone fleeing in panic. It was cold and calculated. Liz survived long enough for neighbors to call 911. She was conscious initially, though severely injured. She was rushed to the hospital the next day, January 26th. She was pronounced dead. The details are horrifying to me. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Nothing was taken. Her purse was inside the house. Her phone was on the table next to the garage sale items. The cash box was untouched. This was just an execution in broad-ass daylight in front of her home, yet somehow it felt almost kind of casual. There was no robbery, no theft, just a carefully planned murder. From the start, law enforcement saw this as deliberate. The weapon was a revolver, meaning no shell casings, no easy forensic evidence was left behind, and the killer was disguised, making even something as simple as, gender identification impossible. There's surveillance footage gives us pieces, but not answers. So you can see the truck, you can see the figure, but you can't see a face. You can't definitively say who this person is or why they did it. And here's something that I found in the files that's particularly frustrating. There were multiple surveillance cameras in the neighborhood, many different angles, but none of them captured a clear shot of the license plate. The truck's plates were either obscured, removed, or just at a frame, and every single piece of footage recovered. And that's not luck. I don't know. So, of course, the question is why? Who would benefit? So investigators immediately looked into the obvious, that hubby of Liz's, Sergio Barraza. He was devastated by her death. I believe he moved in with her parents for like a year after this. I don't think he tried to get any insurance money or anything like that. But, law enforcement had to ask the hard questions. Did he have a motive? Did he orchestrate this? They dug deep into these two people. They didn't just glance at him and move on. So Sergio's timeline that morning, he left for work at 6:45, and his route was traced using his vehicle's GPS, his cell phone pings, and surveillance footage from traffic cameras and businesses along his route. By the time of the shooting at 6:48, he was already well away from the home. This was documented on camera, verifiably not at the scene. But that doesn't rule out involvement, of course, So police had to investigate whether he hired someone. Whether there was something in their marriage or their finances or their communications that pointed to any kind of a motive. Harris County Sheriff's Office detectives conducted what the files describe as an exhaustive investigation into Sergio. They reviewed phone records going back months. They pulled text messages and emails and social media messages. They looked at surveillance footage from his workplace, from his route, from his home. They interviewed coworkers, friends, family members, all of it. They looked at financial documents, bank statements, credit card activity. They examined the couple's relationship, looking for signs of infidelity or abuse, financial strain, like anything that could indicate any kind of a motive. They brought him in for questioning multiple times. He cooperated every single time, never refused, never lawyered up, never dodged a question. Apparently, he even voluntarily took a polygraph test, which he passed. Now, I know polygraphs aren't admissible in court. I know they're not foolproof, but they're a tool. And in this case, it was one more piece that didn't point to the husband. Investigators have stated clearly and publicly we found nothing that would say he was involved. There was a life insurance policy on Liz, a potential red flag, obviously, in any type of murder investigation. It's one of the first things that investigators look at. But according to Sergeant Michael Ritchie of HCSO, Sergio has not claimed it. Like I said earlier, that detail is kind of intriguing. If someone wanted to benefit financially, you might expect them to go after it, but he didn't. And according to the files, he's still working and still paying bills and still living in the same area. There's no evidence of him trying to cash in or disappear. Sergio has been publicly cooperative. He's spoken to the media. He's attended memorials. He's pushed for the case to stay in the public eye. He's participated in interviews and provided updates, and he's kept Liz's name out there. And he's never lawyered up or refused to speak with investigators. So while law enforcement examined him extensively and other people connected to him as well, no evidence linked him to planning or executing this crime. But that leaves us with the harder question. If not him, then who the hell? That doesn't close the case. Investigators explicitly say they are looking at who else would benefit. The family, particularly Liz's father, Bob has long speculated the killing could have been a murder for hire. They point to the planning, the disguise, the execution as signs someone meticulously arranged this. And there are details in the case files that support that theory, like the timing. The shooter knew when to arrive. Liz had only been outside for a few minutes, and Sergio had just left. The garage sale wasn't advertised online, just handwritten signs posted in the neighborhood the day before. So how did this person know exactly when and where to strike? According to the files, investigators believe the killer either had inside knowledge of the couple's schedule or they had been watching the house for days, possibly longer. Which brings us to the second detail. Surveillance footage from the day before. So on January 24th, 2019, the day before the murder, a similar-looking truck was captured on surveillance driving slowly past the Barraza home. Same color, same body style, same deliberate, slow pace. It passed the house multiple times. The files note this as significant. I think it is. This wasn't someone lost. This was someone looking for an address. This was reconnaissance. The shooter was scoping out the scene, checking camera angles, noting the layout, observing routines. The disguise. This wasn't a panicked amateur. The wig, the hat, the bulky clothing, it was all deliberately chosen to obscure identity. Even on camera, you can't make out facial features or distinctive characteristics. Investigators ran the footage through facial recognition software and got nothing. They enhanced the images, nothing. Whoever this person was, they knew how to hide. Fourth was the weapon. A revolver leaves no casings. It's a deliberate choice for someone who wants to minimize forensic evidence. Revolvers are also less common than semi-automatic handguns in criminal cases, which suggests the shooter either had access to older weapons or specifically chose a revolver for this reason. And fifth, the truck circling back. That's not the behavior of someone fleeing in terror. That's someone checking their work, making sure, confirming. The killer wasn't random. They studied the security setup. They knew when Liz's husband would be gone and struck with precision. At least that's how it looks. But if this was a murder for hire, who hired them and why? That's where the case files get frustrating because there's no clear answer. Liz didn't have enemies, by all accounts, and I've read through dozens of witness statements from friends, family, coworkers, neighbors, all of them. She was kind and creative and loved by everyone who knew her. She worked at an elementary school as a special ed aide, and she was patient with the kids. She loved cosplay and Harry Potter and spending time with Sergio. There's no obvious grudge, no known conflict, no financial dispute, no workplace drama, no romantic entanglement. So was this about her, or was it about someone else in her life? The files document investigators looking into extended family, friends, acquaintances, anyone with potential financial or personal motive. They looked at people Sergio knew, people Liz knew, people who might have had access to their schedules, their routines, their lives, and they found nothing concrete. There are persons of interest mentioned in the files, people investigators wanted to talk to, people whose timelines or statements kind of raise questions, but no arrests, no charges, no smoking gun. I want to talk about the truck for a minute because it's both the most visible piece of evidence and the most frustrating. So, the footage showed what appeared to be a dark-colored Nissan Frontier, likely a model year between 2013 and 2018 based on the body style. Investigators put out public requests for information about this vehicle. They checked local sales records, rental agencies, repair shops. They geofenced the area to track cell phones that were near the scene at the time of the murder. And here's what's interesting. According to the files, there were several phones in the area that morning that investigators couldn't account for. Phones that pinged near the Barraza home around the time of the murder, but whose owners either couldn't be identified or had explanations that couldn't be fully verified. That's the kind of detail that kind of keeps a case like this alive because it suggests that the shooter wasn't alone, or at the very least, there were people in the area whose presence hasn't been explained yet. Investigators also looked into whether the truck was stolen, whether it belonged to someone in the area, whether it had been seen in other locations before or after the murder. They issued public appeals with enhanced images of the vehicle, asking anyone who recognized it to come forward. And people did. Dozens of tips came in, maybe hundreds, but none of them panned out. Either the truck didn't match, or the timeline didn't work, or the lead went cold. The files reflect what you'd expect, exhaustive, methodical, frustrating investigative work that's hitting wall after wall. 6 years later, the investigation is still active. Harris County Sheriff's Office continues to follow new leads. They're using modern techniques, geofencing to track devices in the area at the time of the murder, subpoenas for digital evidence, forensic analysis of the surveillance footage using updated technology. They've interviewed hundreds of people. They've followed up on dozens of tips. A $50,000 reward is still offered for information leading to an arrest. In January 2025, the community dedicated a memorial bench to Liz in Burroughs Park in their town. It's a quiet reminder of a life taken too soon and a public appeal for anyone with information to step forward. The bench even has a QR code linking directly to Crime Stoppers. Her family continues to push for justice, refusing to let the case fade from the public attention. Her dad, Bob, has been vocal in the media, keeping her story alive, just reminding people that someone out there knows something. And he's right, because, murders like this don't happen in a vacuum. Someone planned this, someone executed it, and chances are someone else knows about it. Maybe they saw the truck in a driveway. Maybe they heard a conversation weeks before. Maybe they noticed someone acting strangely in the days before or after the murder. Maybe someone confided in them. Maybe someone bragged. That's what investigators are hoping for, that one person who knows something will finally come forward. And let me add this because I think it's important. If you know something, even if it seems small, even if you're not sure if it matters, it might be the piece that breaks this case open. A detail about a truck, a person who wasn't where they said they were, or comment made, anything. The case files are full of small details that on their own don't mean much, but together they build a picture, and one more detail might be the one that finally brings this picture into focus. So here's what we know. Based on the investigation files, the evidence, and the documented facts, Liz Barraza was murdered in her own driveway in broad daylight by someone who came prepared. Investigators have looked into her husband extensively, thoroughly, and exhaustively, found no evidence tying him to the murder. They continue to ask the hard questions, who else could have benefited, who had motive, means, and opportunity, who knew Liz's schedule, who had access to her life. This is a case where every small detail matters. The gun, the disguised shooter, the truck, the footage, the timing, the cell phone pings, the witness statements, financial records. It's a reminder that even with video evidence, modern forensics, and dedicated investigators, some crimes remain stubbornly, maddeningly unsolved. For those who knew her, loved her, just followed the story from afar, the unanswered questions are definitely painful, but investigators, the family, and the community continue to hope that someone will come forward, that one small tip, just one piece of information, could finally bring justice for Liz, because she deserves that, and so does everyone who loved her. If you have information about the case, contact Crime Stoppers at 713-222-TIPS. Remember, even the smallest detail can make a difference. If you are curious about a case or have any story ideas for my off-script episodes, contact info is in the show notes along with support info. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit author.bethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.